Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly, and today our guest is Joe Cortese. I always say that wrong usually. Got
Very
it right
good.
this time.
Very good
Joe's
pronunciation.
been with us before. He's a good friend. So thank you, Joe, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And you have a new book out called After We Die, Then What?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to start off talking about that book. So
Right.
why don't you give us a little bit of background on the book?
Okay, well, it's a compendium, which means it's a fancy word for a collection of all the research on near-death experiences and all the studies of it. It really didn't start until the 1970s
Okay.
because people were afraid to really discuss it with anyone.
Huh.
So in my research, I think I read over 100 books in preparation for writing my book.
Okay.
Because I collected the best of what everyone has found up to this point. And there's a lot of commonalities to near-death experiences, and I indeed had one. And after I mentioned on Facebook that I had this experience and I'm writing a book about it, I had a lot of my friends from back east in Pennsylvania that said, well, I had one too. And that's the way near-death experiences started to be known, because initially people were afraid to discuss it. People would look at you and think, oh, you're crazy. That couldn't have happened. So one of the things that kind of spurred me on is with COVID, a lot of people were dying. Some of my friends were lost. And right before COVID, I lost my father. And one of the things he used to say to me is, hey, when you die, what happens? Mm-hmm. And I always wondered, I was raised strict Roman Catholic, so they have their own belief system, and most religions have a variation of that. There's some kind of afterlife, because people have come back from it, and I'm one of them. And I thought, okay, Dad, I really don't have an answer for you. And another thing he used to say to me is, what do they do all day long up there? Mm-hmm. How do we all fit up there? And I said, Dad, I think it's a spirit world. It's almost like a fourth dimension. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that is really interesting about my discovery and finding what all these researchers have discovered is you can take all the clinical research in the world on near-death experiences and try and explain it to people like everyday language, but there's one commonality. It seems that everyone, no matter what religion you are, right, you go through some type of a tunnel. And it's almost like a magnet drawing you toward the end of the tunnel. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, how do you feel about when you hear scientists say that, it's just an illusion in our mind that because a lot of people claim to have gone through near-death experiences. Yeah. But some scientists is saying that, we create that by making it. That there's something in the brain that sees this bright light when we go into a certain state.
Well, there's a new study being done in quantum physics on that exact topic, and that's in the book.
All right.
But let me tell you that many doctors that were atheists had the same experience. They were in cardiac arrest and were dead, some of them up to 12 to 19 minutes. And, of course, I did more research, and I thought, well, I have an aunt who was dead from a really bad accident, and she was dead over 2 hours, and she came back to life. And when she came back, she had conquered the speech impediment she had her entire life.
Wow.
And she talked about the tunnel. And she talked about all the people that were lining the tunnel in white robes. And there's this bright light at the end of the tunnel. And she felt herself pulled magnetically toward this bright light. And all the while she wanted to go to this light because it was so soothing. She thought, well, maybe I should listen to my relatives that are saying, go back, Peggy.
Ah.
So she did listen, never got to the end of the tunnel. She was pronounced dead in the ER, and they had to wait like an hour and a half until her daughter could come and identify the body before it would be released to the undertaker. And when they pulled out her slab from the refrigerated area, she basically sat up and said, what the hell were you looking at? She had no speech impediment. And from that time on, she was a believer.
And I actually know someone who wrote a book. Morgan St. James is an author locally, and Morgan co-wrote this book, and I can't remember the couple's name right now, but we're going to have you on with him.
Oh, okay, cool.
And he died for 43 minutes.
Wow.
And, they were going to give up, and his wife kept saying, no, don't give up. Try bringing back.
Right.
Because they thought after 20 minutes, there's no hope. And after 43 minutes, he woke up.
I was deceased. I was hit by a truck. And I was down and out for at least 10 minutes. And when I during that 10 minutes, I was in a tunnel and I saw this light, and I didn't know anything about the experience until it happened to me. I had not read about it. I didn't know about my aunt because it happened after my experience. So I'm in this tunnel, and I saw my deceased relatives, aunts and uncles, and they're in white, and they're glowing. And they're saying, go back, Joe, it's not your time. And I wanted to just relax and give in and go to this soothing presence at the end of this tunnel, this bright light. It's hard to describe. It really is. But when I came back and I was rushed to the hospital, I remember that the paramedics that worked on me, they said, please don't go on us. You have to stay with us now that you're back. Because I was gone. So many doctors that were atheists, like I said earlier, they have died and they went through the same experience. And among the most renowned is Dr. Eben Alexander, who now, because of his experience, he does thorough research, and he will not discredit anyone that's had a near-death experience. And he logs them. And so far, he's logged over 20,000. Wow. That he's investigated, and they're genuine. Another one, and you probably heard this name before, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Okay. She was into cancer research, and she would go into hospital rooms and soothe people before they would pass. She would try and calm them and say, look, you're going to have a better life. And she didn't know. And she did this for at least 12 years. And one day she had a coronary. She had a really bad heart attack, and she died. And she had no belief system. She went through the tunnel, had a similar experience, and she went beyond the light. And she said she was in a beautiful garden. And she said, I don't know if you want to believe it or not, I was dead over 19 minutes, and I'm a doctor, and I'm telling you, there is something there.
Don't you think it's... I know it's a silly comparison, but it's kind of like someone who has a back injury. We don't see it, and people complain, and you think they're just complaining. They really don't have that problem. So to me, it's kind of like that. If you've never experienced it, you can't understand. It's just you don't see it, so you don't understand it.
So it's kind of interesting to listen to people that have had the experience, and some have had really bad experiences.
Okay.
Not everyone goes through a nice, peaceful transition.
Oh.
Some people were shown hell.
Okay.
And they were warned if they didn't repent and change their life when they came back, that's where they would end up.
Okay.
So I thought that was pretty interesting. So not everybody goes through the tunnel and goes to heavenly bliss.
So why did you decide to write this book?
I wrote the book basically because my father posed the question, what do you do there? What's it like?
Okay.
And the best description I can get, if I look at all the research I've done, there's basically almost 300 footnotes or references in my book. Because I wanted to make sure that no one would ever say, where did he get that from? Okay, and it's all legitimate information. Okay. So when my dad started asking, some of the best descriptions I found in over 2,000 near-death experiences I read about was it's like a fourth dimension, and it's a translucent screen. Not transparent, translucent. And everyone that's deceased can see you. You can't see them.
Okay.
Unless they wanted you to see them.
Okay.
So when my dad passed, I thought about this and thought about it. And then I knew about my aunt. I told you. I knew about my experience. And then when I told people on Facebook I was going to write a book about it, all these other people started to say, hey, I had a similar experience.
That's really nice. That's cool that you did it that way.
Yeah.
Social media pays off.
Exactly. And what was really ironic is one of my sisters from back in Pennsylvania. She had a near-death experience, and she never mentioned it until I wrote this book. And she said, "Joe, are you going to write another book so I can be included?" So she's journaling in it right now.
I think that's a great idea, as a matter of fact, because I do know people who've had near-death experiences. Right. I myself went through one. So I think it would be cool if you could go back and do, what is that called, like when it's several people's stories?
Testimony.
Yeah. An anthology.
Yeah, an anthology.
Type thing.
Yeah.
Where you get different stories and you can put them together, and then you can do a simulation of what it was all about in the end.
Right.
You know, like
right.
how they're all common or similar.
Yeah, and of course, when I lost a lot of friends because of COVID, I started to think, oh, I wonder where they are. Are they looking at me through this translucent screen? And it kind of keeps you on your toes because you don't want to go to the bad place.
Okay.
You know, and what's really, really exciting is that people that were Hindus, Muslims that don't have a Christian belief system, they have the same experience.
Well, that's life.
I thought that's unique.
Yeah, I do too.
So we're all people, we all are born, we're all going to die, and we're all going to have a very similar experience. Hopefully it's a joyous one.
So I want to ask you too, now is this self-published?
Yes, I self-published it. Mars Publishing did my printing.
Okay.
And they also printed my second book. This is my third. And because of self-publishing, I started on my fourth book already. And it's on Revelation.
Okay.
A lot of people think we're in the ending times, the closing days. You can be quite toxic and pessimistic if you have that attitude or belief. Right. I tend to believe that with an air of optimism, we can turn things around. Mm-hmm. And it might look very negative right now, but I think that God is on our side, and He's in control, and He's not going to let us just blow ourselves up.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think about history, it's we know that people have always thought it's the end times. 2,000 years ago, they thought it was the end times.
Yeah.
So, you know, we do go through that stage, but I do think that we have free will.
Right.
So therefore, we can make a difference and change things.
Part of the problem with people that really are into Bible studies is the last book of the Bible in Revelation. It was Christ who said that He is returning soon. And they take that word soon and they kind of think, well, it could be right now, it could be yesterday, it could be tomorrow. So soon to a person who lives eternally doesn't mean the person is limited by time.
Right.
So it could be any time. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting. I'm trying to dissect Revelation and put it just like I did a lot of the technical and clinical studies on near-death experiences. I'm trying to take that book and make it in practical language for an everyday reader. Because if you really read into it, I don't think we're in the ending days. I really think we have a lot.
Still time left.
Yeah, I think so. So just lead the best life you possibly can, and you'll be okay.
Yeah. We have Lynn sitting over here behind the camera, and she's shaking her head, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Yes. We're not perfect. Just be as good as you can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do your best.
Well, this is aspects of writing, so we also talk about the whole aspect of writing. Mm-hmm. That's why I asked if you were self-published. This is your fourth book. Mm-hmm. And obviously you have more down the road. Yes,
supplement to this one, a follow-up to this one. And I might write another book on... I've kind of avoided the political arena. But my first years of college, and I've had many of them, but my first years I was going to be a political scientist. Mm-hmm. I've always had an interest in history and politics, and unfortunately it shapes our behavior and our attitudes a little too much. So I might take off that topic for another book.
Okay. So what advice would you give someone who wants to get something out there, mm-hmm. realizes he probably won't get a traditional publisher? What about self-publishing?
Self-publishing is the way to go because my first book was published with a publisher.
Okay.
It was full of errors.
Really?
Full of errors, which really, really annoyed me because I'm a perfectionist when it comes to the English language, which I've taught most of my life. Mm-hmm. So I was not happy. I was overcharged. I was not happy at all with the company. and it was a company that's related to a political party in the United States
Okay.
that I won't mention at this point. But my other books I have self-published because you have more control over the content, over the pricing, and over, well, for example, just the cover design.
Right.
You can do your own. You can hire an artist like I did.
But you still have the final say-so.
Yes, you do.
And you're right. That's the one thing I think people don't understand. First of all, when you're traditionally published, you still have a lot of the legwork to do anyway.
Yes, you do.
So to be honest with you, you're in complete control when you're self-published. And I know there are actually authors out there who have published in the past with traditional publishers who are venturing out on their own. I think I mentioned in one show Heather Graham as an example. She's a romance novelist.
Right.
And now she wants to write horror. The publisher wouldn't let her because of her genre. So she went out on her own and she self-publishes on her own.
Right.
So there's a lot of people taking that chance and saying, okay, well, I'm going to go and try and do this on my own. So.
I really like the nonfiction because, facts and truth is probably the best story.
Yeah.
And it can't lie.
Well, but I actually write. Sometimes I'll write. My guys, I need to take this tile. Okay. Sometimes when I write, I will write something that has facts in it, like the alien transcripts I wrote. Right, it actually has science fiction. It's science fiction, but it has science fact and theory in there, and it also has theology.
Right.
So, in order to get the idea of what I was really writing about, I had to put it in a fictional form in order for people to buy into it.
Oh, there you go.
Because if I were to go out there and give them my theory on it, they'd say, that guy's nuts.
Right. So
I thought, well, let me create a fictional story and see if people will buy into it that way.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that people should realize, and I think this is like the initial chapters of my book, is you don't have to be afraid of anything. Don't fear.
Yeah.
A lot of people are afraid of death. We all have to do that. Okay. So there's really nothing to be afraid of, and I try to show that in the book to console people, especially if you're dying from a terminal disease, or like I said earlier, losing people from COVID, especially close friends. It was hard. It really was. And just rest and relax, knowing that we all go to a better place.
So I want to kind of bring that up because you just mentioned it. I think we all know people who didn't buy into the whole COVID thing.
Right.
And then I find out later on they got COVID. How does that change everything? I mean, we're talking about near death. So people who've had COVID. Did they ever share their experience with you of that? Like, did they fear death? What was...
Never afraid of death.
No?
Never. Fortunately, most of my friends were Christians, so they had a belief system.
Okay.
And I had talked to them earlier about the book as it was in process.
Okay.
So they had an idea, especially when I shared my experience. And then as other people started to send me their testimonies about their near-death experiences, they thought, oh my goodness, so that's what it's really going to be like. So they were more relaxed and consoled, and they weren't as afraid to die. So that's kind of a good thing.
That's absolutely... Did they read the book? Or was it even out yet?
Only one.
Okay.
Only one, and that person survived.
Oh, really? Okay.
Only because they had some treatments in the hospital that were, can I say, instrumental in saving their life. And different techniques that can be used, depending on how badly COVID attacks your system.
Yeah.
If you already have a breathing problem, you're a heavy smoker, or you have diabetes or some other condition.
Right, immune system, that attacks the immune
exactly.
system.
Exactly, it'll attack that, and it'll pull you down a lot faster. Yeah.
So where can we find this book?
Okay, the book is on Amazon.
Okay.
And it's also on eBay.
All right, and the title is?
After We Die, Then What? And as I said earlier, it's a compendium, which is a fancy word for a collection of near-death experiences and all the research behind them and what they have discovered. One of the things that was really interesting is getting into mediums, people who have seances or say they can communicate with ghosts or people who have died. And I actually went to some of the best so-called scientifically investigated mediums in the United States.
Okay.
And I found, in their presence, I found them to be unique and genuine. One in particular, by the name of George Anderson, is in New York, and he was actually tested by scientists that cannot prove anything other than what he said was the truth, that he actually communicated with people on the other side. So I thought that was kind of unique.
Yeah.
So that's also in the book, because some mediums are not genuine.
Yeah.
But some are.
And some of it even comes out in the media, like it's something set up. I can remember there was a medium named Tamara Rand, I think was her name.
Yes.
And there was a time, there was a local radio or television host who was about to be syndicated. And it was before Ronald Reagan was the attempt on his life.
Yeah.
And the day before they had filmed this, and he had interviewed her. And then that night, or that day, later on that day is when they attempted, the assassination.
Right.
So that he invited her to come back and pretend like, and wear the same clothes. They called in one cameraman.
Wow.
And retape that as if she had predicted that was going to happen.
Wow.
And unfortunately, that cameraman spilled the beans to like one of the magazines, which you never should do that. And it cost both of them their career.
Right.
So I do know what you mean about someone who's pretending to be a medium.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is maybe she had some ability, but she tarnished everything she'd ever done by doing something like that.
You can't pretend.
Right.
You really can't. Yeah. But George was really mind-blowing, I must say. And, of course, I've seen Teresa Caputo. She's genuine.
Okay.
And she gets vibes all the time. And it really lends credence to the fact that almost everyone that has died and come back said there's almost like a screen. Think of a screen door. And people on the other side are just that close to you. Mm-hmm. They're only a screen away. And you have to realize that when you die, it's in a split second. And even when you die, you still can hear up to 15 minutes. That's why a lot of paramedics will talk to you, even if you're unconscious. And a lot of doctors, if you're pronounced dead, they don't stop talking because sometimes people will respond and come back. Okay? So, one of the other mediums that I found really interesting was Sylvia Brown. And she has since deceased. And she had a really long experience. And hers was unique in that she was gone for a couple of hours. And she was able to see her pets.
Oh, wow.
Her actual pets were in her so-called heaven. And things that looked like her garden, like her house. So if you're to believe all of that, there's a whole different aspect. But you have to realize the universe is unlimited and eternity is forever. So only one person knows what will happen when we cross the path.
I think one thing that adds credence to what you've written is if you think of life in general in this way. Like when we think about, if you go back to the 60s about science fiction films and some of the things that was in those science fiction films have become reality today.
Right.
So you think, where did that thought come from? Is that a genetic thing that is passed on from possibly a civilization from another world?
It could be.
And in life in general, we see this all the time where we see things that can't be possible, and then it proves to be possible.
Right.
So that, to me, is the same thing of what you're talking about. Just because if someone's telling you this happened, you have to at least listen to what they're saying.
Right.
And I don't ever think anyone's crazy if they're telling me something.
No.
But, who knows? I don't know. I don't have the answers.
Well, you really shouldn't judge them.
Right.
You really shouldn't. And everyone's experience is unique, but there are commonalities. And that's one thing I found fascinating. Most of the time, I think it's something like 87%, if I remember correctly, in all the cases that have been verified as near-death experiences, about 87% of them go through a tunnel.
Okay.
But not everyone does. Okay. Some have bad experience.
Yeah.
And then they're given a chance to change.
Redemption.
To come back. Redemption.
Yeah. All right. And do you have a website of your own?
It's in construction as I speak.
Okay. All right. So we'll say that for the next one.
Yeah, say that for the next one.
All right. Well, Joel, thanks so much for being on the show
today. Thank you so much.
All right. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.